I don't even know where to start with the introduction to this conversation.
Oh, neither.
This was one of the heaviest, most shocking. Honestly, I hate the word triggering because it's so overused, but incredibly triggering conversations that we've ever had. I cried. I got all teary.
It was like when you're speechless because you're in awe of someone. That wasn't this. You're speechless because of the story and because of the, I guess, what Tracy went through. And Summer, it's just crazy.
This is all about financial fraud, essentially, this conversation. Financial fraud, it's the sort of thing you see movies on or documentaries on and you're like, there's no way that happened.
You think it's never going to happen to me. And that's exactly what Tracy thought. And then it did happen to her. And so it's just incredible how she's come through this as well and how her thinking and her confidence now and her relationship with money and her relationship with her partner, her new partner, like just all of that now, what she's learned from and how she's put people around her that have supported her through this and everything is pretty incredible.
It's absolutely mind-blowing. And without giving too much away, we'll get into the chat because it actually was quite a long one. But these two women, so we spoke to Tracy and also Summer, who's been helping write the book called The Last Victim. So it's by Tracy Hall and with Summerland, and it's available from the 1st of May, and it's all about the story and what you're about to hear. So if you listen to this and you think, oh my God, I need to read more, it's called The Last Victim, and we'll put a link in the show notes to this podcast in case you want to purchase it.
So, Soph.
Oh, yes.
Who the Hell is Hamish was probably one of the first and probably one of the only podcasts I've ever listened to.
Really?
You know when we were about to start our podcast and I said to you, but who listens to podcasts? I literally had listened to, I reckon there was like Teacher's Pet was one of them and then Who the Hell is Hamish was the other one. And I was so addicted and it was so...
Okay, shit. So I've actually not listened to this podcast.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I actually hadn't heard of it until we came across who we're about to introduce to you on the podcast. Okay, firstly, Summer and Tracy, we're really excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Secondly, I don't know why I feel really nervous about this interview.
I feel like we should be like whispering.
Yeah, no, it feels naughty. Like someone's...
It feels like, oh gosh. It's like we're about to open a real can of worms. Or like,
it's like it's already a podcast series. Like it's definitely in public domain, but for some reason it feels, like haunting or something. So I don't even honestly know where to start. Maybe we will start with you, Tracy. I think when we were researching for this interview and figuring out how we could tell the story and ask you questions and make sure that our audience is learning from the situations that both of you have been in, I think, could we maybe start by painting the picture of what your relationship was like with Max Tavita? Like you were together, I think, for 16 months before it all sort of turned to custard, but would love to kind of get a bit of a picture as to what the relationship was like, what he was like to be with. Can you kind of give us a bit of a picture as to who he was as a person?
Yeah, of course. Well, we met on a dating app in early 2016 and I'd been separated from my husband for about a year, a little over a year actually. And I was kind of at that point where I was ready to meet someone else. I didn't want to find another husband. You know, I wasn't looking for that. I was just looking for someone who I could spend some time with, someone who had similar values to me, someone who liked doing the things that I like doing. I was just ready for that type of company in my life again. And we connected on the dating app and, you know, just texting, and then we moved to conversations, and then we ended up meeting. He lived in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, so in Bondi. I lived on the northern beaches, which, you know, on a good day is probably about a 40 to 45-minute drive. On a bad day, a lot longer. I was a single mum. I was, you know, almost full-time parenting, working full-time. I had a huge job at eBay at the time. So I didn't have a lot of time to, you know, it wasn't like we were seeing each other every night and spending all weekend together. It was a slow and distant relationship to start with. And I think over time we just really got to know each other. We spent our time doing really simple things like, you know, going for long walks. We'd go running. He was really into running. I love running. We both loved the ocean. He was a mad surfer, so we would go surfing, paddleboarding. We would sit down by the beach and have like really simple picnics. We'd go out for meals. I guess we just enjoyed doing the simple things. He was very invested in his work. He presented himself as the chief investment officer for a family office, which I kind of sort of knew what it was. I'd worked in finance in my career, and I sort of knew things that he was talking about, but he certainly presented himself as a really high-level chief investment officer, financial executive. And, yeah, so our relationship was fairly simple, I would say, built on, shared values, shared interests. He found out pretty quickly what I wanted in my life. We seemingly wanted the same things. So from where I was sitting, we had a very intimate and deep, and serious relationship. We were talking about our future towards the end, buying a house in Byron, thinking about what the next few years of our lives look like together.
Okay. And
gosh, it's interesting because we're watching you talk. It's like you're saying all these like amazing things.
It's what you would want really in any dynamic.
Yeah. If you didn't know the full story, you'd be like, oh, wow, what's the problem?
Divine. So
he was great. He was a great guy. Max.
And so in terms of
Max was a great guy.
Max doesn't exist though.
Max was a fictional character, unfortunately.
So can you just explain for those who haven't listened to the podcast, might not know too much about your background and what actually unraveled? So things were fine and good and seemingly easy, comfortable, lovely.
Yeah.
At what point did things start to fall apart and seem off, and what kind of ended up unraveling?
Things fell apart when I was sent a link to a news article one morning after we'd returned home from a trip to Byron Bay, and it was police footage of Max being arrested outside his Bondi apartment.
And you had no idea what?
I had no idea. I looked at this. I remember looking at it going, what's this? It's like talking about some 47-year-old unidentified man that has stolen money from people, and he's been arrested and taken away to the police station. And I thought, there's got to be a mistake. Max is 42. He told me he was 42. And, this whole unraveling happened, and I basically had to pick apart the pieces. And I finally got in touch with his brother-in-law who I had met, and I was trying to find out what had happened, where he'd gone, what the situation was. And I couldn't get in touch with him. And anyway, he ended up texting me when I was down in a car park, and I arrived up from the car park and it dinged and it said, "Tracy, please call me urgently on this number, Chris." And in brackets, he'd written Hamish's brother-in-law. And that's when I found out his real name. And I was like, who the fuck is Hamish?
Oh my God.
Who is Max DeVita? Who is Hamish? And my whole world just spun, because I was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm dealing with here.
I want to chime in, Tracy, because you didn't say that like in the 24 hours leading up to that, that link, you couldn't get a hold of him. And that was so unusual. And you were actually just really concerned for his safety and well-being. Like you thought he was dead.
I thought he died. I called Bondi Police and asked them to do a wellness check on him, because I hadn't heard from him in 24 hours after I'd returned home from Byron. We didn't travel together. He never travelled with me. He always drove and I always flew.
Why was that?
The passport?
Well, because the name on his ticket would have been Hamish McLaren.
Oh my God. Everything must start making sense now. Like you would have been like, no wonder he didn't ever fly with me. Like, yeah. Gosh.
There was always an excuse, always a reason. He wanted to stay up surfing for a few extra days. He preferred to take his time. He had a client to go and see up there. There was always some, really a quick off the mark comment about why, if it was ever questioned. So I never really thought about it, to be honest. I had to get back to get to my daughter, to get back to work, and he had a little bit more flexibility. So yeah, everything kind of unraveled in that moment. I had to get in touch I had to call Bondi Police back and say, he's not dead, he's been arrested. And then I got in touch with the investigators that had arrested him. And then I spent the next 3 weeks of my life unpicking the previous 18 months of my life. And I had to give statement after statement, detail after detail, I had a non-compliant superannuation fund. I could have been done for tax fraud because he'd done a tax return for me. And then during that period of time, I'd worked out that I had lost $317,000.
Wow.
To him. Well, I wasn't sure that, to be honest, I wasn't sure that I'd lost it at that point. I knew that he had it. And it wasn't until, the full investigation happened, the court case, and of course the podcast, Who the Hell is Hamish, really uncovered who he really was. And I realized very quickly that I was never going to see that money again.
That $317,000, what was that made up of?
It was a combination of things. So the majority of the money, so over time and listening to the conversations around investments and the price of this and investment strategies and what he was doing for his family office clients, and it started to turn over a period of time into, who's your superannuation with, and do you know what you're paying in fees? And, those guys, they're thieves. They just take all the money in fees, and you could be earning a lot more money. And, he's quite bolshy in some of those ways, but he seemed like he was a very, very astute investment officer. So I, kind of believed him. So the bulk of the money, he convinced me to set up a self-managed super fund, which I did in my name. And the superannuation that I'd basically, earned over my 24-year career, I took that out and put it into a Bell Potter trading account. So there was a Bell Potter trading account in my name, or I thought there was. I had filled out the forms. I'd gone and done all of the ID checks. I'd had it signed by a JP. The check that I made out was made out to Bell Potter, so he never got that money. But what actually happened was that account with Bell Potter was never actually opened in my name. So there was never a Tracy Hall Investments account at Bell Potter. It was deposited at Bell Potter and then went into one of probably his washing accounts, I would say, and he washed the money that way.
But I don't understand how that even gets through, and there's so much legalities with.
I know.
But there's like the forms you fill out, and then you transfer the money into the account.
Oh, so it's like TransferWise when you're like, I've done it, and you transfer it from your bank to.
They match up the funds, whereas the check was just made out to Bell Potter, which was he'd have other accounts at Bell Potter, which is just like a broker. It's like Goldman Sachs or one of those UBS, one of those banks. So that would have gone into his account. But Tracy thought that they would match up. I was
putting it into my account. So it seemed like it was an account in my name. Of course, I'd never been through this process before, and he was guiding/grooming me through it. And, so I know that now, of course. I would say, well, do not ever do that. But that was the majority of the money. And then there were some other investments where I would transfer money that was purportedly going into my investment account that he was managing on my behalf. But it was actually going into company accounts that he was actually a bankrupt person. So he couldn't actually open a company after that date. So there were companies and company accounts in the name of other people that he was running and operating that I transferred money into. And it was all under sort of different names, like Oceana Financial Markets, for example. And that's the bit that I find really hard to get my head around, is how he was able to open and operate and manage a company bank account when it wasn't even in his name, because he actually wasn't even able to do that.
So, Tracy, were you ever interested in checking your super or your investments? And if you were, what did you look at? Well, what did he show you?
Yeah, so I asked him for reports and logins. He showed me a report one time. It was probably about 6 or 8 pages. It was on Bell Potter letterhead, and it was just trade after trade after trade. I'm going to say hundreds of trades on these 6 pages with amounts, and the starting amount was the money that I had put in, and then the trade and the ups and downs. And I didn't obviously understand all of the trades because they were, whatever funds they were that he was trading in. And I was looking at it and I said, can you explain this to me? And he said, look, these are all the trades, these are the ins, these are the outs, this is the profit, this is the loss. And he said, but the bit you need to take notice of is this number at the end. And he, flipped through 6 pages of line after line of trades, and it was obviously significant more than what I had put in. And he said, look, you know, in the last 3 months or whatever it was, you know, you've made this much return and this is the money we're working with now, so we can invest more, we can do this. So, and this was on official Bell Potter letterhead. Basically, he just forged the whole thing.
It's crazy because we always go on about, you know, make sure you check your investments and all of that and understand what you're looking at. But when you've got someone that is genuinely trying to confuse you, I mean, hats off to you for even asking and wanting to check, and you thought you were. And it's just, I know, it's so, frustrating.
I actually feel kind of sick. I'm like, I am so sorry that you went through such a traumatic experience. And I honestly can't even begin to imagine how you've even built trust back up with friends, family, relationships. Like it's so in the book, you write a lot about the different red flags and things that now you look back on that seem obvious. I mean, I'm sure like now thinking about the idea of a 6-page document, it's like, can you just log me in? I want to see it digitally, things like that. Are there any other kind of obvious red flags? I know that's such a lame way to put it when you're like, he's a professional con artist. But like if you were to look back at it now, and I'm asking the question not to make you feel silly because he is a professional, but more to like, for anyone who's listening who might be feeling a little bit fishy or funny about a situation, what are the kinds of things that you picked up on in hindsight you wish someone had said on a podcast you were listening to?
Yeah, 100%. And there are a lot in retrospect. At the time, I was blissfully happy and I trusted him. I trusted him with everything I had. And I think, yes, absolutely, like ask the hard questions because it feels a bit awkward. And when you love someone or you're in a relationship to kind of say, hey, I really need, really pushing for it, really ask the questions. Another tip that I would give, Sophie, to people is talk about, as hard as it is, talk about what you're doing with friends, people that have known you for years. I didn't tell anyone that I was investing with Hamish. The only person I told at the time was my friend Kath, who was the one that had the spidey senses and went, and investigated him on her own.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that happened.
Yeah. So Kath is one of my best friends. She asks a lot of questions all the time. I was saying to her, I'm going to put my superannuation through Hamish, and her spidey senses just went crazy. And she was really worried and was crying at breakfast one day, and she's not a crier. She's very stoic. And she was like, I'm really worried. And I was like, Kath, but you don't know him. You don't know our relationship. You've never met him. He has my best interests at heart. He wants me to be financially independent. He wants the best for me because obviously this is the story he had been feeding me for the last year. And I kind of put it down to Kath just being a little bit, she just didn't know him. And had I had that same conversation with 5, 6, 10 of my friends, I reckon a bunch of them would have come back and went, oh, are you sure, Trace? Like, oh, who, like, where? Or one of them would have had an investment with Bell Potter and like, okay, well, make sure it's in your name. Make sure that the logins are set up in your name, and then you can transfer the money. So I feel like because these conversations are so tricky, and one of the reasons I'm so passionate about telling this story is that money is still really, really hard to talk about. We can it's getting better, I would say, but, no one tells each other how much they earn. No one tells each other how much they're investing. No one certainly talks about money that they've lost. And I feel like had I had more of those conversations with the people who have known and loved me for the longest, there would have been some more warning bells. And had I had 3 or 4 people come to me and go, I just need you to check this, it would have started to sink in. So that's another tip. It's hard because people don't want to talk about it.
It's so interesting because this is the whole reason we have our podcast, is to encourage people, particularly women, to talk about money for a whole lot of different reasons. And whether it's to increase your salary or your value, what you're worth, all of those. But I had never ever thought of that reason as that because you could be being taken advantage of, and you could be a victim of financial
Your
betrayal.
parents don't talk about where they're investing their money.
No.
That's often quite a taboo thing as well. But your parents, our aging populations are some of the most vulnerable when it comes to financial matters. And, your parent and technologically, they're not as savvy. They've also got the most money.
Yeah.
So, we should be having these conversations with our parents too. Do you need any help? Is there any way I can help you? Do you want to bounce anything off me? Are you feeling comfortable? Do you have all your logins? When do you get your reports? How comfortable? There's a range of different questions you can ask, and they're not the easiest questions. And especially our parents' generations, certainly, there was no money talk over the dinner table when I was growing up. And, I really want people to think about that really hard.
There's also, I guess, it's like when you date a guy that's a bit of a dickhead and you've got, you've got a few friends that
We've
are
all
like,
been there.
Yeah. It was like, do not date him. But, one or two.
Anything you've said in particular?
Speaking from experience. And they're like, do not date him. You're like, but he's lovely. You don't know him like I do. And I totally hear you, like, not saying that, oh gosh, what I went through was nothing compared to what you did. And then it's fine.
There's a reason people talk about things.
Totally. Your friends have nothing to gain from that, They've got your best interest at heart. They only want what's best for you. And so if, like you said, if you had 5 Kaths telling you, hold up, something's fishy here, then you would have probably listened. But, I mean, hindsight's great. But
I think as humans, we want to see the best in people. And Summer and I have been doing a lot of thinking around cognitive bias. And there's a lot of brain glitches that we all have, especially when you're falling in love. And, there's an optimism bias. I have a huge optimism. I think the world's a bloody amazing place and full of people who only have our best interests at heart. And, so there's that. There's cognitive bias, which, there's confirmation bias, which all the things that Hamish had said to me, it was like death by 1,000 cuts. I can't tell you how many conversations I listened to about his investment trades at work. I heard people on the other end of the phone. He had people working with him to create this whole movie. He would call this woman called Claudia probably 5 or 6 times a day. Claude, what's the price of gold and where did we trade it at yesterday? Where's it going to trade in another 2 hours? I want you to come back to me in an hour and a half. Honestly,
who the fuck is Claudia?
Yeah, where's Claudia at? Honestly,
I don't know where Claudia is. Honestly, I don't know. But when you can hear someone on the other end of the phone, it wasn't like he was pretending to have this conversation with someone in a back office somewhere. I don't know. And so everything he presented, when we finally got to talk about my money and what I was going to do there, all my confirmation biases were ticked. Oh, yes, he's an investment professional. Yes, he knows what he's talking about. Yes, he's made money for the richest people in Australia. Oh, yes, I understand what he's talking. Yes, he sent me an email every week of his investment strategies for his private clients. Yes, he sends me text messages at 1:30 in the morning when the US stock market opens telling me the impact of Trump's antics overnight on the economy.
Do you think he actually thinks he's an investment banker? Is he? Because if you're going that deep into a lie, is there an element of you believe what you're talking about?
No, well, he used to have a financial services license and he did used to trade, but he was banned. And I found this out all afterwards when I actually knew his real name.
But he knew the lingo and things like that because he'd worked in it.
And he actually didn't have a job. He would drop me off in the city. Okay, so here's another story that will blow your mind. We'd get up in the morning. If I'd had a sleepover at his place, I would get in my work gear, have to go into eBay office in the city. He would put on his Tom Ford suit, put on his, expensive watch, go downstairs. We'd hop in the Range Rover, one of the 5 cars he had, which was, I don't even know whose cars these were, but anyway, hop in one of the cars. We'd drive into the city. We'd pull into his street, which was in the financial district of Sydney. I used to work there. And he said, oh, T, he just called me T, just you get out here because you can just walk straight down that street to eBay. I've got to park down, 4 floors under and, I'll see you at the end of the day. I'll talk to you later or whatever. And I used to get out of the car, see you later, great night, thanks. And he would drive back to Bondi and put his sport shorts back on and figure out ways to steal more money from people. Like the extent that this man went to create this appearance of who he was for me. And then I would say, Sophie, he probably, read blogs and did his own research and got up on the lingo. And, in some ways he was incredibly smart. But, he used his powers for evil and not for good, unfortunately.
How have you got to a place where you've got your finances more in an independent and control space? Because I know you spent a long time rebuilding, not just from a healing perspective, but also financially. So I guess a two-part question. Firstly, how did you get your finances back on track, and what did you sort of do after you saw he's gone to jail and you've learned all this stuff? And then secondly, how have you managed to get yourself to a place of, okay, I'm kind of open to being in this world again? Because I'd honestly, I don't even know how you would have done that.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the second part of the question was what I had to get my head around. In my head, I went, well, Max is dead. But then I was telling myself, well, he never existed in the first place. It was like having your lover, your partner, your life partner, whatever, just die. Because we went from talking 15 times a day and him being a very, very big part of my life and my conversation and my thinking to, oh my God, like he is literally just being wiped from my life. And then on top of that, I had to get my head around the fact that man actually never existed. He just fabricated a character that he knew I'd fall in love with, which I did. And it was all just a complete sham. So then I was like, well, then my life has been a complete sham for the last year and a half. So that whole thing was just like, I was in a parallel universe for quite a long time. I became depressed. I was very anxious. On top of that, during that time, he was calling me from jail and he was sending me letters. So there was still this contact that in some way I was desperate for, because I was so desperate for answers. And the police wouldn't talk to me. Bell Potter wouldn't talk to me. His family wouldn't talk to me. His friends wouldn't talk to me. Nobody would talk to me. Everyone was so tight-lipped. And I'm trying to put this jigsaw puzzle back together. And that's when that a year later, I went and met with the investigator from the Australian, Greg Barup, the journalist. And that's when it started to become clear. But I think during that period, emotionally, I mean, yes, Hamish had completely betrayed. Like, he had flattened me emotionally. But the hardest thing for me was that I didn't trust myself anymore. You can trust other people, or you can, you've had people in your life for many years, they've got your best interests, you have a tight family, whatever those things are, they are manageable. But I just didn't think it would ever be me. And I thought I was smarter than that. I thought I traveled the world. I had a strong intuition. I had great friends, an excellent education. I had a huge career. And suddenly I was like, how could I have let this happen? I didn't trust my own judgment. So every decision I made was just so painful, because I wasn't sure I was actually going to be making the right decision, because I just didn't trust myself. And that was the bit that was the hardest to rebuild, if I'm really honest. But 7 years down the track, I can say that I'm probably stronger than I've ever been. I'm more aware, and and here we are having the conversation about it. So that's the emotional piece. And then to the other part of your question around the financial rebuilding, I think I probably want to say that it's not lost on me that I had a really good job at the time. I had a very supportive employer, and I had lost everything. So I had no savings. I had nothing apart from my monthly salary, but I had a good job. And even though I was dying inside every day, I had to turn up to work because I couldn't lose my income. And so that spurred me on. And then, of course, I had a daughter I had to get off to school, and I then had to get really smart really quickly, because I had nothing. I had nothing behind. If some emergency happened, I didn't have an emergency fund. I didn't have any backup. I had nothing. And I went and found a financial advisor, and I interviewed three recommendations. I researched them. I stalked them. I deep stalked them on the internet. I made sure they had their financial services license. I looked for recommendations. I asked them for referrals of clients they've got, so I could ring them and ask them for feedback. It was like an interview process, but I was so scared with my money to trust, but I knew I had to get a professional to help me because I wasn't in a place to make these decisions in that traumatized state. And I think after any big event in life, whether it's divorce, death, illness, something like this, you know, for that period of time after where you're really grieving or you're in that traumatic state, making big decisions it's not the time to make big decisions. So I needed some help, and I found this incredible woman who is still my financial advisor today. And we sat in a room and I had to recount the story, which was so painful and so embarrassing. And I was just so ashamed. And she said, "It's okay, Trace." She said, "Well, you're going to be okay. You have an incredible career and you're determined." And she said, "I want you to think about what your life looks like in 1 year, in 2 years, in 5 years, and 10 years' time. We're going to map it out." And she got the whiteboard and we're mapping out what I wanted to do and what my career would look like and how much money I would have saved and how it's going to rebuild my superannuation, what that would look like from a modelling perspective 10 years down the line, where I wanted my daughter to go to school, where, you know, all the things. So it was almost like we visioned up my life for the next 10 years. And she said, "Okay, you can do this." And we put a plan together. We got my wills in order. We got my power of attorney in order. We got a plan to siphon off money from my salary that would go into a portfolio, because I even now I won't have enough money to retire on because I'd lost so much in superannuation. So to start that again at sort of 43, 44, even if I work until I'm 65, 68, 70, I'm not going to have enough. So I had to come up with another strategy, and she helped me do that. You know, so we went through the whole kit and caboodle, and not only did that give me confidence that I was going to be okay, it actually, it put a plan in place. It gave me something to aim for.
And I also think it's really important, something you touched on before, is like when you're going through that traumatic experience, I mean, you thought you were financially independent and had that financial security. And so I think, we've always kind of talked about how important it is that, you know, you have that visibility in your finances. And I know that you definitely tried and thought you had, but it's because when events like that happen that are traumatic, you want to take the time to heal and deal with whether it's divorce or loss. You don't then want to be focusing on, oh gosh, okay, what's my financial situation? So the fact that you had to do both at the same time would have been, completely overwhelming. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. And I think your brain in those circumstances, and I know this through, you know, grieving the loss of my father in my 20s, is that a grieving brain or a traumatized brain does not operate in the way that a normal brain does. So your rational and logical thinking is so taken up by trying to essentially get your brain to understand that this is your new reality. It's your new reality without your parent, or it's your new reality without the love of your life who's just taken your life savings. So much of your brain power is taken up just trying to get your head around your new reality that, you know, I was a really crap employee during that time. I was probably not a great parent. I was probably not a great friend, because I was making mistakes. You know, my rational brain, which is why when I got the financial advisor and the professionals to help me, they helped take away some of that burden of making the correct decisions. And they guided me through that. And what I would say is that, you know, having the structure and the regulation of an advisor or, you know, a lawyer or whatever the professional service is that you take on board, it protects you in a way. And, you know, another tip and trick is someone's offering to invest your money and they're kind of doing it in a way that's outside the regulations that exist in our societies for our protection, then I would be like, ooh, red flag. You know, there's no shortcuts when it comes to building wealth. I don't think. There are some people that do it, but it's probably borderline gambling, in my opinion. Like I don't have a big enough risk profile to be thinking about doing that. I want a safe, secure, steady, hardworking way forward. And people that are like, oh, you know, if we just do this, we can pull together some money. This is a great investment and we'll get these returns. And it's not, they don't have a license, or it's not through a regulated, you know, platform, for example. That to me would be like, oh, warning bells, do not go there, because you're not protected. If something happens, the regulators can't protect you then.
Yeah.
Really good points.
Do you think that's the biggest financial learning or the biggest change in your behavior or what you've learned in terms of how you deal with your, I guess, the financial advice you now get, all the financial recommendations, is that you're a lot more concerned that everything's kind of by the book, whereas before you're probably a bit more risk taking? Or
potentially. And then I am much more critical on the information that I get now. So if someone says to me, and it may not even be like it's across the board for me now because I definitely see the world differently. But if someone says something that something inside me goes, I don't know about that, I'll go and research it. Or I'll ask another question. I'll go, really? I thought that, and I don't have a problem being a little bit, and I don't think antagonistic is the word. Someone might have a better word for it for me, but I'm really curious as to the information I'm getting. And I don't have a problem being bold about that now, whereas before I was probably a bit more like, I'll just take it on face value. If that's what they said, that's what it is. In regard to anything now, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to research that and just, it's almost like fact checking.
You're skeptical. You're skeptical, not cynical. Skeptical.
It's all about, it's about trusting your gut. And it's like, it's your money. It's your hard-earned money. If you don't understand completely or your gut's a bit off, don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't feel silly asking those questions. I think if someone can't explain it in a way that makes sense to you or help you understand it or is averse to helping you understand, then that's a bit of a red flag as well. Yeah.
I kind of want to chat about the idea of heading towards, like, where you are now 7 years on. He's going to be released from prison, am I right, in about 2 years, or on parole in 2 years?
On parole in 2 and a bit years.
And how do you feel in the lead up to that? And has that been dragging up, old wounds? Has it been actually cathartic to be towards the end? I don't know. I'm just sort of curious to know how that feels, and also if there's still pent up resentment or anger that you kind of feel like you want to actually say to him. Like, is there any element of wanting to kind of close that chapter when he is released, or not?
I've thought a lot about that. And what I do know about Hamish is that he's unable to tell the truth. So even if I confronted him and asked him, all the questions I have, all the unanswered, pieces of the puzzle that are still in my mind, who's Claudia? I don't think I'd ever get a straight answer. I don't think he has the capacity to tell the truth, is my honest opinion. I think he has a sickness. I think he is likely to do this again. He's never had another job. This is what he's done his whole life. Do I think he's rehabilitated? I don't know, probably not. So no, I don't really have a desire to have a conversation with him and close this off. What I've chosen to do is to unpick the story and write about it with Summer in the hope that it educates and forewarns other people. Because, what I do know is, like, a day doesn't go by when I don't get targeted by a scam or some sort of fraudulent activity. And I think we're all in that boat now, as well as our parents and, soon to be our children who have got their own devices with logins, etc. So, this is a broad conversation to have that goes beyond the very unfortunate and unlucky situation I found myself in. And I think it's a conversation that we need to have. We need to keep having it. We need to be constantly aware, because these tricksters, they're getting more and more sophisticated. And I think the more that we can talk about it, the more comfortable we can get talking about it. The more stories you hear about people getting scammed or losing money or losing their identity, whatever the case may be, the more it's top of mind and the less likely it is to happen. It's not going to be fully eradicated. I'm aware of that. But, I think this is an important conversation to keep having. So regardless of what Hamish does, this is a conversation that needs to be continued. And in writing the book and being able to put the detail behind how he did it, and, the emotional side of it is, how do you rebuild after such a traumatic event? It is possible. It's completely possible. It's hard, but it's possible. And I wanted to act as that beacon of hope for people that may be drudging through the mud at the moment with their own emotional turmoil, that the other end, out the other side, it's a pretty good world out there.
Tracy, I want to point out that I think when you were flattened by Hamish, I remember you saying like, you just want to like, you're tired of hurting, right? You just want to like expedite the healing process. But even though you were doing all of the right things, like you actually just kind of had to sit with it, and you couldn't skip to the part where you can't skip to where you are now, right? But what did you call it? A spiritual bypass?
Yeah, no one gets a spiritual bypass. So that, that whole like post-traumatic growth, and you read all those things and you're like, I just want to be there now. I want to have my post-traumatic growth moment. And the reality is you have to go through all the feelings. You have to go through all the despair. You have to do the work, and you have to take a really long, hard look at yourself as well. And that's taken years. That's taken years and years and years for me to do, and will probably continue, because I still, there are times, and it's probably because we're talking a lot about it at the moment. We've written the book, but I had a dream a couple of weeks ago, and I could hear his voice. It was like he was in my lounge room yelling out to me. I couldn't see him, but I heard his voice, and it was so just gross. Like I can still hear his voice so clearly in my mind, and that's just my subconscious like processing the trauma, and it's just part of it. And maybe not a day has gone by in 7 years when I haven't thought about this. Not one day.
Do you think you can be in love with someone again?
Yes, and I am. And
you don't think every 5 seconds, I'm just going to quickly Google this
to make sure that you are,
you've said, or I'm just going to look at your LinkedIn to check your professional history and call your boss. Like, how do you
check all the scars on your body and make sure and ask
call
how you got them.
and just check if you got stabbed.
Well, my partner now is a man that I met in my early 20s when we were working at a hedge fund startup company, and we worked together for a few years, and we both had met our respective partners and got married and went away and had children. We lost contact for about 10 or 12 years. And we ran into each other in the city. Actually, I was with Hamish at this time when we ran into each other and reconnected. And I was deeply in love with Hamish, and Tim had just recently coming out of his marriage. And we just became buddies. Like we'd known each other for so long, and even though we hadn't sort of connected in many years, we sort of we had that history, and then we just became besties. Like he would be my +1 at events, I would be his +1. He got back into the dating scene at some point, so I wrote his profile. I filtered all his pictures for him to make him look hotter, and so we just became besties. And a year after that, Hamish was arrested, and I was an absolute mess for a year. And he sort of, was there as my buddy and my friend. And then, over a year after that, we ended up getting together, which was very strange because we were best friends. So
wait, but you missed the part where he takes you to, I'm like, I know all
how
the things I'm not saying.
She's like, oh, but you've got to tell this story. It's so good.
I know.
Okay, maybe not spoiler, don't go read the book, but it's really interesting because he asked her the very same question. He sat her down on the beach and said, Tracy, do you ever think you're going to be able to love again?
And I just burst into tears and ugly cried for the next half an hour. So that was awesome. But yeah, it was, and then, us getting together, and, there was a level of comfort for me because I knew his past. I'd known him for 21 years. And I mean, look, I don't know. I'm not in this situation, but if I wasn't with him, I don't know that I could be with anyone else. I don't know. Certainly at the time we got together, there was no way I was going near another relationship again. I was going to grow old as a cat woman. I had my cat, had my kid. I was going to be happy doing that. And, it kind of crept up on me, and he is a very patient man, and he has been through everything with me. We were working together when my dad died. And so he went through all of that with me. And, so we know each other very, very well. I know his family. I can 100% trust him. But, as in any relationship, there are bumps along the road because of our fears and things that have happened to us. And, all I can say is he's a very patient man.
I'm so happy that you have found someone. It makes the whole story like a happy ending, which I know is not always the case with stories. But holy
it's nice that this one is,
I'm happy that's And Summer, you wrote the book together, and firstly, cannot wait to read it. I don't think there would ever be a better interview in terms. Okay, sorry, I don't mean like we're good at interviewing. I just mean listening to you speak. There's no way you wouldn't listen to that story and not want to read the book.
And now we know you. We'll be
oh my God.
Like,
so looking forward to reading it. But I guess like from your perspective, having spoken to Tracy at like enormous length about what she went through and being able to articulate that into a book, what kind of learning have you had being alongside her throughout that process? And is there anything that you wanted to share for people listening who might, I don't know, either be in a similar situation or maybe in the future or feeling like untrusting? What was sort of your big learnings writing the book with her?
So many. She's the fearless leader we all need. But bit of a backstory. Tracy actually slipped into my DMs on Instagram. So like red flag number one, right? Like just coming, how many people do we just have to like block in your DMs? But she reached out to me and pretty quickly, I'll just skip that little part, Tracy, where I was like, everybody wants to write a book. She's like, I think I have a cool story. I was like, cool, everyone does. And then she's like, so I was on this podcast called Who the Hell is Hamish? And I knew exactly who she was because, full disclosure, like I'm a bit of a crime junkie. I love true crime. I'm obsessed with these stories. And I'm even more obsessed when women like Tracy come out on top and just completely like, maybe you're proud to call yourself a victim, yes, but and I don't want to use the word survivor, but you just like turned a heap of bull crap into this like shining, beautiful thing that we can all learn from. And it was really timely. Like I'm a bit woo-woo. I think the universe brings you people at the right time, because right at that moment that you and I were having the conversation about your story and you were in my DMs and we're emailing, my marriage ended and I separated from my husband and I had 2 kids. And I knew things were unstable financially. I knew that there was like a little bit of deception. I didn't know the full extent of it. And while I'm writing Tracy's book, it's kind of unfolding. And it's like I have direct access to the perfect person to shepherd me through it. Like I remember, I feel really bad because when you are in kind of a traumatized state, you make mistakes, right? Things slip through the cracks. So I'm like, you didn't get the best version of me, Tracy. like definitely some typos in there and some stuff got dropped. But I remember you saying things to me like, you're in the eye of the storm right now. Like everything is just going around. Like you can't see anything, but like you really made me trust that there is calm and the sun does shine again and that you will rebuild and be stronger. And she's just living proof of that. So like that would be the biggest takeaway for me.
Because I guess also for you, being able to write from a place of like raw emotion, if you're going through a really similar experience, being able to articulate Tracy's story through how you're feeling would have maybe been cathartic, and you maybe came to conclusions or realizations quicker than you would have if you didn't have Tracy alongside.
100%.
To have a parallel conversation or story comparison.
I should have paid you actually to like let me write this book with you, because I feel like she was like, not only has she been through a separation and been a single mom and then also had some pretty devastating financial losses. You were like counseling me through all of this and really like empowering me to ask the questions and talking me like recognizing what was an emotional response and just being like encouraging me to get comfortable with like letting go of my need of control and like really backing myself. So I felt like you were the biggest cheerleader ever. And it's hard to write creatively when you don't feel good, right? Like normally I'm like pumped up. What could I do? I'm thinking of everything, but like I was pretty depressed for a few months of this stuff. Not like pretty depressed, like very low, very sad. And I remember someone did say to me, a fellow author who I hadn't talked to in ages, and I told her what I was going through. And she said, I only think that this is going to make you a more empathetic writer. And when I started leaning into the pain more and just like really feeling it, like I think that's when the book really wrote itself, right? I was just like, let's just combine our heartache and lean into that. Because normally I'm just like the bubbly, hyper, ooh, let's go, girl. And I had to find another way to get the creativity out.
Do you think this happens a lot more than a lot of us realize in terms of deceit within relationships financially? Is this because even just the fact that you two managed to find each other and you were going through it at the same time, it just sort of makes me think there must be so many people that have experienced it, maybe don't even know it's happening. I don't know. Has there been all these stories that have come out of the woodwork as you've been writing the story where you're like, whoa, this is actually everywhere?
I can't tell you the amount of people that come to me, both friends and people I've known for a long time, and then strangers that reach out to me and tell me their stories. And it might be a scam or deception. It could be divorce. It could be illness. It is everywhere. And this is what astounds me is like I've had friends that after the podcast came and told me, oh, my parents lost all their superannuation to a fraudster back in 1986. And I'm like, how is it that I've been friends with you for 18 years and we've never had this conversation? How is that possible? Another girlfriend, oh yeah, my dad lost millions through a bad scam back in the UK. And I'm like I still can't get my head around it. But what it does is it opens up, I think, by being vulnerable and telling the story and going, you know what, this happens all the time. It happens to smart people, it happens to good people. And suddenly people go, oh, okay, here's a door. Here's how I can talk about it. I sat at dinner one night with this woman and her children. She was a 75-year-old woman and her grown-up children were there at the dinner table. I sat opposite her and she had heard about my story. And she started telling me her story. And I think it must have been in the 80s. She was 40, had gone through a divorce with a fairly high-profile man. And she got her divorce settlement and invested it with a friend who was shady and basically ran away with all of the money. And they went from a very nice lifestyle to pretty much not having anything. And she's telling me this story, tears streaming down her face, her kids' mouth, like they knew something had happened, but they didn't know the detail. And she is telling me this story over dinner one night. And I'm just saying, she said, and I've never told anybody. She was 75. And I thought, that poor woman, that poor woman that has held on to that. And, of that generation that, again, no tears at the dinner table, don't burden the children. And I just, my heart went out to her and I thought she's been carrying this around for 35 years. And I'm lucky enough to have been able to tell this story and to put it out into the world to hopefully help people like her.
Do you think before we end, only because I started feeling like I was climbing the hill of hope and then all of a sudden I slid back down again when you were like,
can we end on the top of the hill?
I know. Can we climb back up with like what are some, can we finish on, yes, it's probably, there's lots of scary, nasty people out there who are doing this as a full-time job. Like that's just unfortunately the reality of the world we live in. What can people remember and hold on to from a hope perspective to make sure that they're not one of those people?
How I have put it together in my brain is, when I think about Hamish and people like Hamish, they are outliers. They are the top 1% of offenders in this world. So it's very unlikely that you're going to come across somebody like them. I choose to believe that the world is inherently good. 99% of people want to do the right thing. They want to exist in this world in peace and in happiness. And I believe that Hamish is where he needs to be. And I get to live an incredible life. I see the ocean every day. I can go running. I get to spend time with my family and friends. And that's the way I choose to look at the world. Hamish is an outlier. He's not the world.
I just think about your advice that you would give Asha, right? Like she has a daughter who's going to wade into the dating pool soon. And you're like, you don't want her to be afraid. You don't want her to go out there looking for red flags because that's a shitty way to live.
Yeah.
It is a shitty way to live, isn't it?
I would have done the opposite and be like, oh no, he's got a red flag, but it's so true. I love that spin on it. It's like, no, it is a terrible way to live.
Well, I think if you go into a relationship just looking for the red flags, then love actually can't exist in that world. It actually can't. And so you're never going to find love if you go into a relationship with that in mind. And that's not to say you don't have your wits about you, because we all know that it's important to be really switched on. But love can't exist when all you're looking for is the red flags.
Thank you both so much for your time. I'm honestly gobsmacked. And we can't wait to read the book. We'll put all of the information and details on our socials and in the podcast show notes. But yeah, thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
You.
Great to meet you.